Hello, welcome to General Conference Conversations, the podcast where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm super excited to be here with you, studying the words of our living prophets, apostles, and chosen leaders. I've loved listening to podcasts about Come Follow Me, and I saw a need for a podcast centered around the General Conference talks. I'm not a scholar, I'm not an expert, I'm a 20-something who just simply adores the gospel. The things I discuss are my opinions. As one of my favorite podcasts, At Last She Said It, often says, your mileage may vary. In addition to my connections and thoughts, I will include a list of questions at the end of every episode as a place to start with your own deeper study of each talk. And I hope this podcast will be a jumping off point as you apply these principles to your life. In that spirit, I invite you to read and study today's talk before listening to this episode. Listen for what the Lord is saying to you personally. Then come join me for a beautiful discussion together. Hello. Good morning. Well, it's my morning. Good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time it is for you. I'm excited to be back. I hope you guys' weekends were good and that you're excited for conference really soon. It's so soon and I'm so excited. So, I guess we'll just jump right in. Today's talk is the second to last talk in the Sunday morning session. The next one is President Nelson's talk, which I'm very excited about. And then we'll be on to the Saturday afternoon session, which is so crazy. So, this one, though, is by Elder Hugo Martinez. It's called Teaching Self-Reliance to Children and Youth. And honestly, I struggled with this talk a little bit because I struggle with self-reliance a little bit. The way that we talk about self-reliance and how much we push self-reliance is like a facet of the gospel. And he talks about that in here, and I'll talk about it a little bit. But like, I feel like sometimes it gets a little bit too far of like, it becomes a little bit toxic, where we feel like we can't ask for help for anything. And then we judge others because they're not self-reliant enough to XYZ, right? Like, they're not self-reliant enough. They don't have long-term food storage. They're not self-reliant enough. Or, excuse me. Or, they're having a hard time paying their tithing, so they're not self-reliant enough. Or they're having to use the bishop's storehouse. They're not self-reliant enough. And like, obviously I think self-reliance is important. Wow. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat this morning. There we go. Obviously self-reliance is important, like being able to make your own money and like all of that, right? Like being able to have a place to live and making your own money and being able to pay your own bills and like things like that. Obviously nobody wants to be at the mercy of someone else's money forever. But I feel like sometimes when we talk about self-reliance, we only focus on the temporal stuff. And what I liked about Elder Martinez's talk was that he talked a lot about, he's talking about children and youth, so he's talking about the children and youth program. And so he talks about all four of those areas the children and youth program cover. So it's not just the physical or temporal, like you need to get a better education so you can get a better job and provide for your family. It's also like the spiritual self-reliance and like things like that. And so I'm gonna start actually reading from the talk so I don't like go through all of my notes in 5 seconds. So he talks about this boy in Wilfred Vanny who lives in the Ivory Coast, and he and his 7 siblings and his mother joined the church when he was 6. He was baptized when he was 8. His father passed away when he was 11. He said, though saddened by the family situation, Wilfrid decided to continue in school with his mother's encouragement and with church support. He graduated from secondary school and served a full-time mission in the Ghana Cape Coast mission, where he learned English. He then went on to university, got a diploma in accounting and finance. He wasn't really able to find employment in that field, so he started as a waiter in a 5-star hotel, and then he worked and became a bilingual receptionist. And then he enrolled in Pathways and is studying a course in hospitality and tourism management, and he wants to become like a manager of a Highland hotel. And so that was kind of his example of like, in all of those areas of like education and persistence and like all of those things, to be able to provide for his family and himself, and also his mother and his siblings. So he defines self-reliance, or I guess he quotes the General Handbook. It says, self-reliance is defined as the ability, commitment, and effort to provide the spiritual and temporal necessities of life for self and family. And so that's my first kind of question for you, as this is all about self-reliance, is how are you spiritually self-reliant and how are you temporally self-reliant? And I say those terms broadly because I think all of us, to an extent, are spiritually and temporally self-reliant. Maybe you're not, and that's totally fine, but like spiritually self-reliant as in, you know, you have your own testimony of something. It doesn't have to be the whole church, it doesn't have to be every facet of doctrine, but like, do you have a simple testimony of Joseph Smith or of the Book of Mormon? That's being spiritually self-reliant, and you can work on being more spiritually self-reliant and temporally self-reliant. Like, I'm pretty sure you know how to tie your shoes, right? Or order for yourself at a restaurant, or, you know, even if you can't afford everything, I'm sure you're affording something. Even if you are relying on the church or on family or on friends or whatever, I'm living in my husband's family's house. Like, we don't pay rent. We pay everything else, but we don't pay rent. And so like, we are still partially temporarily self-reliant, right? Like, we do pay stuff and we pay for our own insurance and whatever, but we are relying on somebody else just a little bit. But I want you to like think about your life. How are you spiritually self-reliant and how are you temporally self-reliant? Because that's a place to start, and you're doing good. And so he goes on to say, self-reliance is the doctrine of the gospel of Jesus Christ, not a program. And on that point, I also wanted to point it to bring up, and on the point we were just talking about, is that it's also okay to ask for help. The gospel of Jesus Christ is also one of love and sharing and community, right? Like, I don't ever remember reading about Jesus saying, oh, well, you're not paying enough taxes, so you can't be a member of my church, or whatever it may be, right? He took people in. He himself did not have a place to sleep. He relied on the charity of others, and slept under the stars and camped and whatever, right? Like, it's okay to ask for help, and spiritually as well. Like, it's obviously okay to ask for help spiritually from friends, from family, from leaders at church, not just priesthood leaders, but, Relief Society, primary leaders, whatever it may be, to help you with questions or to direct you to someone who can help you with questions, right? Or to help keep you accountable if you're trying to work on something specific. It's definitely okay to ask for help. So I like this a lot, and I talked about this a little bit earlier. He says, we become self-reliant throughout our lives, by growing in spiritual strength, improving our physical and emotional health, pursuing our education and employment, and being temporally prepared. Now, to me, this just sounds like becoming a well-rounded human being and working on ourselves. And I think the phrase self-reliance, at least in my mind, has been linked to the actual program of self-reliance, right? The self-reliance classes that the church does, words do on I think it's a word or stake level of, getting a better education or starting your own business. There's one for like budgeting or something like personal finances. There's a fourth one, but I can't remember what it is. Maybe it's emotional. I feel like it's emotional health. But like I was saying earlier, I feel like sometimes self-reliance can be toxic, teaching us that we can't ask for help no matter what, and that's kind of what self-reliance has been linked to. And so if self-reliance makes you clench up or makes you flinch a little bit, I want you to think about this paragraph is we become self-reliant throughout our lives by growing in spiritual strength, improving our physical and emotional health, pursuing our education and employment, and being temporally prepared. And all of those are about preparation and striving towards not being 100% spiritually strong, not being 100% physically and emotionally healthy, not being perfectly educated and employed, or being perfectly temporally prepared, right? It's growing in our spiritual strength. It's improving our physical and emotional health. It's pursuing education and employment, and being temporally prepared for things that might come. And that's all a process. As he says, is this task ever finished during our lives? No, it is a lifelong process of learning, growth, and work. Just like anything else in the gospel, it's not going to be perfect tomorrow. Your spiritual strength is not going to be perfect tomorrow. My emotional health is different every single day, but I'm working on it. I'm trying. Do I try the same every day? No, and that's okay. And sometimes I backslide. I have anxiety, and I have generalized anxiety disorder with a focus in social anxiety, which is super exciting and super fun. And I've come a long way since I was diagnosed. It's been 5.5 years ago now, that I was diagnosed and started therapy. And of course, my therapist you probably have this your whole life. You're pretty high functioning, and so you've never really put together as anxiety. Looking back, I can definitely tell that I suffered from some pretty severe anxiety, but it wasn't severe enough that I've never been on medication. I went to therapy for a year, and then she was like, you've improved enough that you don't need to go right now. Please go in the future if you need to. And I've come a long way since then. I've gone on a mission. I studied abroad. I've done big things that someone with social anxiety is really hard for me. And anxiety in general, not knowing what's coming next. Because I like to be prepared. And I don't like changes, and I don't like spontaneity. But I've come a long way with those things. There are definitely things that have happened and things that I've gone through that I'm okay, I'm better with not knowing what the future holds. Still terrifies me that I don't know what's going to happen in the next year. Still terrifies me that I don't know what's going to happen the next month. COVID has taught a lot of people that that we can't be for sure about tomorrow, right? But I've come a long way, And then this summer has been weird for me and for my husband, and we've just been married for just shy of a year. It'll be 11 months in a couple of weeks. And so this is our first year together, and it's been weird, and we're figuring things out, and I mean, it's been great, obviously. I love my husband, but like, it's also been crazy, and we've been all over and trying to figure out work and school, and if we're going to school, and if we're working, and like all this stuff. And there was a couple of weeks where we had a really high contact with other people. We hadn't for a couple of months. And then we went camping with his family, and then his family came to our house. And I didn't get a lot of downtime. I didn't get a lot of alone time. I didn't get a lot of alone time with my husband. I was constantly like on, right? Like socially, I was constantly on. I was constantly interacting with people. And it killed me. It was only a week and a half, and I felt like I backslid like 4 years. And I did not function for 3 weeks. I'm just coming out of it, and it was really frustrating for me, as I'm in the middle of it as well, of this debilitating, I don't have any motivation to do anything. I have so much that I want to do and become and work on, and I can't get up. I can't even get up to eat, and now I feel like garbage because I haven't eaten all day, and I need to drink water, and I have a headache. And it was just physically and emotionally and mentally, I was just done. I was out for the count. And as I started to come out of it, I was like, man, that sucks. I've worked so hard on this. I have worked so hard on being better than this, and so it was really frustrating, and it's still really frustrating, but I also know that it's a process, and that my anxiety is not going to go away ever, right? I can work on it, and I can be better with it, but I kind of let things slide, and I wasn't as diligent in taking care of myself and knowing when I needed to step back. And when I needed to say, hey, I'm done, I need alone time, I need whatever, I thought that I could just power through. And so all of that to say, it's all a process. And so, like I said, if self-reliance is something that, really bugs you, and you're just oh, but I'm not self-reliant, and I feel like I'm a horrible person, member, child of God, whatever, because I'm not spiritually self-reliant, or I'm not physically self-reliant, or I don't have a good education, or whatever. One, please stop comparing yourself to everybody, because you are your own person and it will come. And two, maybe think about self-reliance by a different name, as being well-rounded, as self-improvement. I feel like that would be better than self-reliance, because we're meant to rely on other people. That's why we're put into families. That's why we're put into wards. We're not supposed to just be all alone by ourselves forever. God wants us to be with people and around people and relying on people, and He wants other people to rely on us as well. That's literally our baptismal covenant, is that we're going to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort. And that's super important. So anyway, long diatribe, but so he goes on to talk about Children in Youth Program, because up to this point, of course, he's been talking about what self-reliance is. And his whole topic is how can we teach self-reliance to children and youth, which at first I was like, no, but now that I'm thinking about it as self-improvement and being well-rounded human beings, I definitely want my children to do that, and I want my primary kids that I teach to know that they can rely on their own spiritual growth and their own spiritual revelation, their own personal revelation. I want them to know that they can work on being better, and if they don't like something that they do, they can change it, that they have the power to do that. And isn't that the whole point of the gospel, is that we can change and that we can be better? The answer is yes. But anyway, so he brings up the Children and Youth Program, and I love the Children and Youth Program, and I think that it was unfortunately timed announcement. Because if you remember, they announced the new Children and Youth Program. It was November? I'm trying to remember what month it was. It was while I was on my mission, and it was October, November of 2019. So literally 4 months before COVID hit. And I don't think it was even implemented until January of 2020. And so it was literally in implementation, the beginning of stages of implementation for 2 months. And I remember being at a bishop's house on my mission, watching the broadcast with him, announcing the new Children and Youth Program. And I remember just being so excited about it, because I was like, I would have loved this as a kid. And I might still not have done much with it because I wasn't super engaged as a youth, but I would have liked that better than personal progress, where my goals were mapped out for me. And I was prescribed, what I should be working on. And with the Children and Youth Program, it's 4 different areas, and each child makes goals in those 4 different areas for them. And then, primary youth activities, whatever, is supposed to be there to support those goals. So if one of the young women in your class has a goal to learn how to bake a cake, then you could do a mutual activity where you bake a cake, and then they can either mark that off as their goal, or that's their starting point, or that's an end point where they teach somebody to make a cake, right? There's a lot of flexibility with it. I remember my bishop being this is going to be hard to make sure that the leaders are supporting and not doing everything, which is fair, and I totally understand that. And I think that's part of the reason why it's not really super caught on. I forgot about this until I read this. I haven't forgot about it, but I think about it occasionally. I'm a primary teacher. And then a few months ago, at the beginning of the year, I was a youth Sunday school teacher. And so I have no idea. With youth, I guess it's a little bit different because I was their Sunday school teacher, and a lot of the youth stuff happens in young women's and young men's. But with primary, I don't know how that happens. Are we supposed to be making goals with our kids? Are we supposed to be working with their parents? Are we supposed to be catering our lessons to their goals? I don't know. I haven't been giving any direction on that whatsoever. I've only been a primary teacher for a couple of months, and it's been a wacky summer, so I don't blame anybody, but I'm I don't know how that does. I don't know how that fits in. And I don't know if any of the leaders know how that fits in either, because it's literally been since COVID. And so it's still, kind of new for a lot of wards to be back in person. It's been a bit, of course, right? For some wards, it's been almost a year. But it might have been, a wacky schedule, or it was only a sacrament meeting, or whatever. And so getting back into the swing of everything has been hard. And so on top of that, we're still working with a new-ish program that's only been around for a couple of years and hasn't been implemented for those 2 years. And so I hope that it will start to catch on more and that we can get more guidance on how to do that and, really engage kids in having these goals, because I think it's a fantastic idea. And even just like this one, he says, parents and children learn the gospel of Jesus Christ, participate in service and activities, and work together in 4 areas of personal development that are unique for each child. It is no longer the same prescribed program for all. And doesn't that just say well-rounded individual and self-improvement? That's absolutely what this is teaching the kids to make goals that make sense for their life. Because not everybody needs to learn how to sew, but maybe they really want to learn how to sew, and that's great. Not everybody is a sports person, but maybe they really want to make it to the varsity team or whatever it may be, right? Or they want to make a starter, or they want to XYZ, right? It makes sense for each kid to have different goals that are, placed around the same thing of the gospel of Jesus Christ, of learning and improving with Christ's help, and that Christ can help you in all aspects of your life. And it's not just spiritual, not just emotional, but physical. He can help support you and encourage you, and the same principles that go into spiritual development can go into physical development and all that jazz. So the whole program is based off of Luke 2:52. It says, when Jesus was your age, he learned and grew. You are learning and growing too. The scriptures say Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. This scripture refers to growth and learning in the spiritual aspect, favor with God, the social aspect, favor with man, the physical aspect, stature, and the intellectual aspect, wisdom. So that's where these 4 things come from, is from this verse in Luke 2. So spiritual, social, physical, and intellectual are the 4. I wanted to ask you this question. Have you ever thought about making and working on goals in these 4 areas, even if you are not a child or youth, even if you are not a teacher of child or youth, an advisor of children and youth, you don't work with children and youth at all, you don't have kids, whatever. Have you thought about making and working on goals in these 4 areas? We did as missionaries, and because, we were already making goals as missionaries, we were encouraged to make transfer goals, so every 6 weeks, personally and with our companions. I had mission goals that I was working on that I wanted to do throughout my mission that I would kind of check back on. And of course, we're supposed to make goals for our area. And so, after the program was announced, my next companion, I believe, had the idea of being well, why don't we make goals? Or my last companion and I started making goals that pertain to the New Children and Youth program. And it was so much easier for me to make goals when I had categories that I could make goals within. Because it usually ended up being kind of the same things of well, I need to talk to more people. I need to be better at studying, preaching my gospel. I need to be whatever, right? But when I was more specific of hey, what do I want to do spiritually? I want to be better at reading, preaching my gospel. And using what I learn in preaching my gospel as a missionary in the field. Or, physically, I was really bad at doing my morning workouts. And so usually it was actually try a morning workouts or actually do morning workouts. Intellectual, I was missionary still, so a lot of it was studying the scriptures and knowing the scriptures, but some of it wasn't. And then socially, I was I need to talk to more people. That was usually my go-to because I was really bad at talking to people. Or, it was sit next to the new people in the ward on Sundays, or greet the new people in the Word, or meet a new person in the Word, go up and introduce myself to a new person in the Word that I hadn't met before, every week, whatever it was. And so it helped, and I've done it a little bit since I've been home, but I've been not great at like doing goals, but like specifically for these things. But it makes it really easy to like look at my life and be like, hey, intellectually, what do I want to work on? Do I want to take a course? Do I want to take a class? Physically, what do I want to work on? Do I want to get more steps in? Do I want to walk more? Do I want to be more active? Do I want to not sit as much? Do I want to eat better? Do I want to make sure that I shower every day? Whatever, right? Like it's nice to look at my life in those kind of 4 different ways and being like, okay, I can improve kind of everything with that. And also the physical aspect doesn't just need to be physical activity. It can also be mental and emotional health. I also have to think about that, because I'm like, what can I do better for my anxiety? What can I do better for my mental health? Like just in general. But anyway, so if you've never thought about that, I encourage you to, if you're a goal maker, or even if you're not a goal maker, just to look at your life and be like, hey, what can I improve in these 4 areas? It's a good place to start, and it's usually super simple to do. So, and then he goes on to talk about, we teach these things to children by our good example, by working and serving with them, studying the scriptures, and following the teachings of Jesus Christ as taught by prophets. And he emphasizes, of course, it is important that they create their own goals in each area. Parents and leaders can teach, counsel, and support. And I really like that too, and I remember that's, as I said, that's what my bishop was kind of worried about, was like, that balance between the youth doing stuff and like being self-reliant and like self-motivated, and leaders and parents counseling and supporting, like doing enough to encourage and motivate and whatever, but not taking over. Like there has to be a balance there, and it's hard, and it's different for every ward, of course. Like I said, it is important, and he says it's important that all of us create our own goals. That, obviously as a 5-year-old, as like a sunbeam, then you're probably going to be like, hey, what about working on this? But, a 14-year-old, they're pretty smart. They can usually be like, I need to work on my D in Spanish, or whatever it is. And that's a huge part of being self-reliant, of improving yourself, that you're not relying on other people to tell you what's wrong, but that you're, or not what's wrong, but like what you can work on, but that you are seeing that in your own life and being like, oh, I can improve on this, and I can rely on Christ to help me improve on this. That's the big part. So he gives a couple of examples, and then he says, in closing, let us follow our Savior Jesus Christ and his gospel by becoming self-reliant throughout our lives and teaching this to our children and youth. You can do this best by 1, being good examples of service to others, 2, living and teaching the doctrine and principles of self-reliance, and 3, obeying the commandment to build self-reliance as part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, all of this, I want to bring up again, if the phrase self-reliance bugs you, how can you think about it differently? And of course, like I said, my examples, my possibilities are like self-improvement, thinking about it that way, or thinking about it as becoming well-rounded. But is there a different way that like works for you, that as we've been talking about the definition of self-reliance, and how it works with, the gospel of Jesus Christ, how would you define self-reliance in your brain? What phrase would you use? How would you explain it to somebody? How would you explain it to yourself that would be motivating and not like debilitating and make you like cringe and be like, well, I'm never going to be self-reliant? Because none of us are. Like, we're all going to have to ask for help. But like, what can help you be motivated to improve yourself, to become more well-rounded? What phrase, what mantra, whatever would help you with that? I think that will help if we think about things in different ways. Often a word or phrase or something has become associated with like a step-by-step process or like a checklist. And so changing the phrase and changing the way that we think about it or what we call something, or looking at the actual why behind it or the actual doctrine, principles behind it, can help us have a better relationship with that concept. Another example of that was like ministering, right? Visiting and home teaching had become a checklist for a lot of people. And as a kid, I was like, why are these weird people coming over, reading us a story from the ensign, and then leaving? Like, what does that do for us? What does that do for them? And so when they changed it to ministering, I was like, oh, it's basically the same thing, right? Like, you're still assigned to people and asked to kind of look over them, but it's not a checklist of, oh yeah, I went and I shared my monthly message, bye. But like, you have a little bit more freedom, which you always do with home visiting teaching as well. But that it's more that like just changing it from visiting and home teaching, like it's not just teaching, it's not just visiting, right? That you're ministering to them in whatever way that they need ministering. And so with like principles of self-reliance, the principle is, and the doctrine is, becoming better, repentance, the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? That we are improving ourselves and helping to improve those around us. Again, it is a community experience. Life is a community experience. Those are the principles. It's not just, oh, I can do everything myself, bye. Which is sometimes how it comes off, and sometimes how like the phrase self-reliance literally means I'm relying on myself. And in some ways that's good, right? In some ways it's not. And so phrasing it a little bit differently, understanding the principles behind it and the why behind it, the why behind self-reliance, can help us to kind of put that in a different perspective. So that's my last question, but I'll recap, that would be bad. Recap my questions. So the first one was, first two, I guess. How are you spiritually self-reliant, and how are you temporally self-reliant? Where's my next one? Oh, have you ever thought of making and working on goals in these 4 areas, the spiritual, social, physical, and intellectual? And then just that last one of, if the phrase self-reliance bugs you, how can you think of it differently? How can you use the principles taught in this talk and in the self-reliance, all the content and everything on Gospel Library? How can you use that to think about it differently and in a way that will actually motivate you and not discourage you? So that's all I have for today. I'm grateful that y'all have listened so far. It's been an interesting project for me. but it's been good, and I'm grateful that people are actually listening. Thank you. So I will talk to y'all next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of General Conference Conversations. Be sure to follow and share us on any social media. And if you like the show, feel free to leave us a review or tell your friends. Until next time.